The authorities found the Van Voorst children pretty sharpish, given the circumstances. It was fortunate that the heat had refused to settle in the evening. This stomach-churning warmth, coupled with the unfamiliar geography of Costa Adeje, had steamed their little brains and cooked away that youthful, ambitious desire to get lost. You're listening to Episode 1 of Pulp, Surreal Stories from a Nearby Skull, presented by the Sleepy Bones Detective Agency, an audio zine broadcasting short fiction once per week. We must warn you that the following episode contains graphic scenes of a shocking nature, suicide, and other references to death. It is intended for mature audiences only. On this fateful day, the Van Voorsts were 3 sleeps into a 3-sleep break from the tarmac playground of Didcot Parkway. The 9 o'clock sun had set, hiding the unfamiliar dirt-washed walls of room 53, and the children had been resigned to an early bedtime under the drooping eyes of Lisa Van Voorst, formerly Kimball. Lisa was the mother of Patrick, and Patrick was the eldest of the 3 at 5 years old. Both had been invited along to the holiday by Eric, Lisa's brother, much to his new wife's chagrin. It was the least he could do, he thought. Lisa's husband had passed away only last year, and the Kimball family had all but exiled her out of suspicion. Eric Van Voorst had scrimped and saved for this excursion. A few extra tickets was nothing compared to the sunbeam smiles of the children, and the uncoiling of stress from his beloved sister. It wasn't exactly as he pictured it, not the honeymoon he'd imagined from his khaki-scratched plexiglass booth, but it was his first mini-break away from work in 10 years, and he was happy to be spending quality time with his wife. Kira Van Voorst was a relatively recent addition to their tight-knit clan, and while she had an obvious gripe with Lisa and Patrick's inclusion, she also took issue with her own children being there. Morgan, 3.5 years old, and from Eric's previous marriage. And Bertie, her own little sprog, born only recently after a whirlwind few months. The eldest of which had foiled her thought of dropping the little ones off at their grandmother's by understandably fearing the 89-year-old's new Shar-Pei, Sydney. You can only tell a child that there are no bad dogs so many times. On that third night, the Van Voorsts would see a little respite from the whinging and the whining. Lisa would look after the children, allowing the newlyweds a little time alone in the sticky heat of resort territory Tenerife, for a night of foot-long cocktails, titty beaches, and cocaine-fueled karaoke. The children were tucked up and locked down. A pitiful desk fan blew coolish air onto 2 feverish little faces in the twin-bed back room. Lisa planted herself only a screen door away, right beside baby Bertie. The littlest one was no bother, really. From day one, she could sleep her life away without even a hum. Not like Morgan, who, even to this day, could be kept up all night by the slightest beep or creak. Take, for example, the creak of the patio chair provided at Aunt Lisa's expense. The booze weighed her down in it, as though the bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon in her clutches had been laced with lead. This was a common occurrence, having already written off 2 of 3 wooden stools. As she shifted her weight towards the coin-operated television, the penny-saver plastic expanded and sunk, begging for mercy until she returned to a comfortable position, eyes affixed on the tourist-obliging station of ITV reruns. Then, the flick of her bronze windproof, and the spark of its flint as she lit her last cigarette of the night. Heavy breathing whistled, then twin winces as the Van Voorst children's legal guardian stretches once again past her natural wingspan to up the volume on the television set as an innocent woman is released from a 3-week prison sentence. She soon falls asleep, leaving the soap opera running. Her neck bobs into the optimal position. A lit menthol Super King falls. It makes 3 lengthwise rotations before landing cherry down on the felt back, and Patrick leaps to his feet. He'd been waiting for this moment, as he did every night, feigning sleep, creeping in the cover of bedtime, to keep them safe, to save the firefighters a job. Morgan felt the air shift as Patrick slid their bedroom door back open. The atmosphere had only just settled down, and that waft of Mother Nature's thick, moist breath turned her stomach. She was much too little for this kind of environment. It confused her, and it was difficult to move through. The poor thing had one of those headaches that throbbed up and down when she moved her head, as though her brain had become unbuckled from its seat. Sweat made her soft skin lumped and red, as it had been when she was smaller. She felt the tips of her chubby fingers fuzzing, like the television sometimes did, and her tongue tasted all furry. She needed to do something like scrub her insides out with a pink pipe cleaner, and really get the gunk out. Inching towards the small plastic fan was not the solution. Soon, she was hanging off the edge of her mattress, where the window's weak breath barely brushed the matted hairs off the burns on her shoulders. She would give up, following her fall. When Morgan opened her sore little eyes, she could see that Patrick had given up too, his upper half now propped upright against a parade of thin pillows which he'd stolen from a housekeeping cart, and his lower half starfishing across the duvet. His jammies were rolled up all the way above his scuffed knees, and the bottom of his hook, line and stinker pajama top had been fittingly dampened from the sweat it had soaked from his forehead. At first, the boy took no notice of his cousin's disapproving "you woke me up" stare. Instead, he kept his eyes staring straight out through the roller blinds. The shapes and tones which it half blocked were as warm as the plastic-covered mattress beneath him. Street lamps and distant room lights signalled a whole new waking world outside of his bedroom. Not like in King Sutton. In town, the daylight ended too early for the boundless energy of a growing boy. Here, those same rules didn't seem to apply, because he could hear music in the distance, laughter in the corridors, and there must have been a party upstairs because Patrick could hear dancing in the room above. It wasn't fair. Tomorrow would be their last day on the island, and anyway, they'd argue, they would have boiled in that room. Just an hour, he decided. Just long enough for the nighttime to take effect, and for the moon to help cool down the building. His mother wouldn't mind. Hell, she wouldn't even notice if they were quick enough. Patrick wasn't in the mood to take no for an answer. Not that Morgan would have objected. He didn't even really like her because every time he saw her, all she'd ever want to do was follow him around or sulk occasionally. He got her to dump out her belongings onto their bed, which he then shaped into a person beneath the duvet. Then, he packed some supplies into Morgan's backpack. 2 pillow chocolates, 2 minibar water bottles, and a blanket, just in case. It was Morgan who went for baby Bertie, but Patrick nodded in agreement. After all, fairness was the whole point of the venture, and how fair would it be to leave a family member behind? Patrick had a plan, see. Morgan might have missed it during her post-flight nap, but when they arrived in Costa whatever, the shuttle bus had taken them past a small carnival, which for no fair reason, Uncle Eric crossed off the list. "It's a bit orange," he'd said. "A bit dusty, really," added his wife. Uncle Eric's little white lie had no effect on Patrick, a child who'd heard every excuse in the book. His mother hadn't even taken him to play in the pool in Bradbury, despite his constant pestering over the summer. And now it had been closed for repairs, so the boy knew for a fact that he would probably never set foot on Tenerife again. At least, probably not until he had little ones of his own. After making sure that baby Bertie was comfortable and quiet, the 3 of them slipped out of the hotel room without waking Lisa. Her erratic breathing and occasional snorts made the process quite an ordeal for Morgan, who was certain that the imposing woman would wake and whip the children back into bed. A solid 15 minutes passed, but Patrick was able to slip his cousins from the sanctity of their steaming stayover and into the cooler air of nighttime. To avoid pestering from foreign and visiting adults, the Van Voorst children clambered over the resort's east-facing wall and circled back around to the main road. Patrick boosted his 2 cousins upwards, allowing Morgan to toss her rucksack over the boundary with reckless abandon. It landed with an almost wet thud. Baby Bertie didn't make a sound as Morgan followed with grace, letting herself down gently as to not get too much mud on her new sandals. Patrick followed, not unlike the backpack, throwing himself over the wall in a feat of great strength for a 5-year-old. Like he was trying to prove something. Perhaps that he was strong enough to keep the little ones safe. That nothing had changed. And it wasn't a big deal. Not really. It was a slow march, but the Van Voorst children carried on townwards, where the tarmac gave way to dirt more often than not, and critters were heard but not seen, sneaking about the shadows as much as they were. On occasion, a car would pass them by. Some would even stop at the sight of small silhouettes, and some even came close to getting out. But they were on holiday, and it was probably just a fox, something along those lines, you know? By the time the children had reached the park, the mid-evening warmth had worn off, and the fun had been closed to the public. In fairness, that would have explained the cars they'd seen, and the general sense of merriment that came with the convoy. Spotlights still shone on the soda toss, the hooker duck, and the plastic bag goldfish. Music pulsed out of the waltzer, heavy enough to shake the little one's fringe out of place. And the star of the show, the carousel, hadn't even finished its final lap of the evening. Unfortunately, territory belonging to the fairground had been gated up and wrapped in a chicken wire fence. Patrick's enthusiasm endured, but Morgan wanted to turn back, because he hadn't seen it yet. The beast, creeping towards them from behind the fence. It emanated the low murmuring of a voxel nova. Low to the ground on 4 muscular legs, it pulled its lips back and forth over 100 warped teeth. Its eyes dripped yellow, and green slopped from its snout. It held their gaze entirely as it crept across the dusty landscape and stopped, just about an arm's length from them, unable to progress past the fencing. Morgan wasted no time fleeing the scene, although her cousin was quick to catch her. She couldn't stop her feet kicking as he lifted her off the ground. The poor thing didn't quite understand it, but there was something deep within her that could not stand the sight of such an animal. An urge to escape from it, built into her by her father. As Morgan's 3rd trimester approached, Anna Van Voorst began to withdraw from her family. Initially, the heavy fog of depression took a simple form in a refusal to leave the house and a loss of appetite. Eric was taken aback, however, upon the discovery of scratch marks across now raised flesh. And when the baby arrived, Anna Van Voorst moved into her own flat 35 minutes away. Motivated by uncertainty, Eric funded her estrangement. Responsibility was shared still, albeit mired by a physical distance. He would return home from his chapel of platform information and announcements of delay, take off into the dusk towards what was once his darling, feed and clothe his child, feed and clothe his partner still, and leave her alone once more until dawn. When dreams of her abyssal loneliness weighed too much on his conscience, Eric prescribed a pup, a rescue, a border collie, which would keep his partner company, perhaps coax her from her asset-liquidizing hidey hole. In the grim summer months, he popped the seal on his government-mandated holiday hours, scooped up little Morgan, and swapped their bundle of joy for an aging little lassie named Polly. Polly, the border collie. She was put down 5 days later. Only 3 days had passed before Eric became restless, half out of anxiety, half because he'd never owned a dog before, and he was excited to have given one a home. On the 4th day, curiosity would stain Eric, as sodden flesh stained the animal. According to the coroner, all of 22 hours had passed before she made that decision. Polly hardly knew her. She couldn't be blamed. And neither could Eric for passing on that trait. With no knowledge of these events, the poor girl couldn't process this fear, only mimic it. The captive shivered in her cousin's arms as he span her around, plonking her feet on the earth once more. Now, she was facing the animal again. The beast seemed to shiver as well, vibrating in position almost, skew-if, as though its blood-sausage body rebelled against gravity, not unlike the rides it called home. Morgan froze into place, her feet now burrowed into the ground. The animal followed suit, burying its snout as though tracing her scent through the bones of the earth. Upon its return, its two gaping nostrils had become home to a scourge of seed bugs, which in an instant fell victim to a gnarled purple tongue, waved across its maw. Without words, Patrick tapped his cousin's backpack. The impact uprooted her, forcing a step forward. The creature recoiled, and Patrick tapped the backpack once more. He mimed his intentions, and Morgan was swayed by his confidence. She tossed her rucksack into the air once more. This time, it kicked up dust as it landed behind the chain link. It didn't move a muscle, the animal just took it, staring at the children as their improvised weapon landed an inch from its face. Those bulbous eyes, the colour of a rain-soaked ashtray. It whimpered as it prodded the item with its filthy, dripping muzzle. At the sound of its master, the animal doubled back from their location. An older gentleman emerged from one of the shooting galleries, the fingers on his left hand shaped for whistling, while the nubs on his right clutched spent rifle pellets. He had come to investigate the pup's dinner-time disturbance when he clocked the Van Voorst children behind the fence. Sun-scorched and balding, the gentleman introduced himself in a familiar accent as the owner of this jamboree and allowed the eldest child to explain their situation. Their courage would be rewarded at last, as the operator opened up shop for the children free of charge. He would pocket his shrapnel, pick up the little one's backpack, and totter them through his tire-tracked territory. When they approached the carousel, the operator tied his gun to the rails outside his booth. He placed the children's belongings beside the animal, and asked another employee to load them into the ride, as he informed the proper authorities of the children's whereabouts. It would take them 35 minutes to arrive. The operator was asked to remain on the phone to the authorities until officers arrived on the scene. However, it was his animal's intense stare that outfought his desire to comply. The children gripped tight the reins of their fiberglass stallions. 3 of the 6 suspended speakers coughed out copyright-free music. As the children made their rotations, the operator could hear the eldest one calling out to him. "What about the littlest one?" he asked. "It's not fair." The operator tried to pull the backpack away from the pup, but it resisted. It barked, because it knew what was in there. And it was best that the operator didn't. A scream, unheard amongst the calls of joy emanating from the children as they rode their lifeless cavalry towards the flashing lights. You have been listening to There Are No Bad Dogs, an episode of Pulp, Surreal Stories From a Nearby Skull, written and directed by Jake Lucy. This production is copyright 2019 by the Sleepy Bones Detective Agency, and is intended for enjoyment purposes only. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Please visit us on the web at lewsey.co. That's lewsey.co for more surreal stories.